It all started with a scream, a sharp, angry voice echoing down the manicured street of Willow Creek. "This is an eyesore." Karen's words cut through the quiet morning air like a knife, her finger trembling as she pointed at my garden. I stood there, my hands trembling with disbelief as I stared at the barren patch where my flowers had been. Flowers I had spent months nurturing, gone. Every last bloom ripped from the soil like they were nothing more than weeds. And for what? Because my yard dared to be different in a neighborhood obsessed with uniformity. But this wasn't the end, not by a long shot. If Karen thought she could tear down what I built and get away with it, she was about to learn a hard lesson. I wasn't going to just replant my flowers. I was going to turn my entire yard into a spectacle, an explosion of color and life so bold that it would make her beige empire tremble. And there wasn't a thing she could do to stop me. The day I moved into Willow Creek Estates, everything seemed perfect. The wide, tree-lined streets, the spotless sidewalks, and houses that looked like they had been plucked straight from a home magazine. It was the kind of place where people waved at each other from their driveways and children rode their bikes in safe, perfect circles. But beneath the pristine facade was a force more terrifying than anything I'd faced before. An unyielding HOA led by Karen, a woman who treated the neighborhood like her personal kingdom. At first, I didn't think much of it. I was too busy settling in, making the house feel like home. I barely noticed the polite but firm emails about trash bin placement or lawn heights. But the day I planted my garden, I made my first mistake. I still remember the afternoon I knelt in the dirt, hands covered in soil, as I carefully arranged the flower beds, roses in shades of crimson and blush, lavender swaying softly in the breeze, and sunflowers standing tall like golden soldiers. My mother had always said flowers weren't just decoration. They were a sign of life, a reminder to keep growing no matter how tough things got. And after losing her, I needed that reminder more than ever. My garden was more than just plants. It was a connection to her, a way to keep her memory alive. But to Karen, it was an unforgivable offense. It started with the warnings, printed notices stuffed into my mailbox with the HOA's official seal. Non-compliant landscaping, they read. At first, I laughed them off. How could flowers possibly be against the rules? But Karen wasn't laughing. Day after day, she patrolled the street like a hawk, clipboard in hand, making notes and snapping photos. I tried to be polite. I tried to reason with her. "They're just flowers," I said one afternoon, catching her as she scribbled another violation. "They bring joy to the neighborhood." She adjusted her sunglasses, her lips curling into a thin smile. "Rules are rules," she said coldly, "and I enforce them." The morning I found my garden destroyed, I felt something inside me snap. The petals, once vibrant, were strewn across the yard like confetti from a funeral. My hands shook as I knelt in the dirt, picking up the broken stems. A bright yellow violation notice flapped in the breeze, taped to my front door, and at the bottom, in Karen's harsh, unmistakable handwriting, "Corrective action taken." I wanted to scream, to cry, but instead, I smiled. If Karen wanted a war, she had just fired the first shot, and I was going to finish it. I spent the next week planning my revenge. While Karen slept comfortably in her perfectly beige home, I worked under the cover of darkness. I pored over the HOA bylaws, searching for any loophole I could use, and that's when I found it. A hidden clause buried in the fine print. Decorative landscaping for memorial purposes was exempt from aesthetic regulations. My garden wasn't just a personal project. It was a tribute to my mother, and no amount of petty power tripping could erase that. Night after night, I planted. I ordered exotic seeds from every corner of the country, rare orchids, wild poppies, and fields of daisies. I transformed my lawn into a floral paradise. It wasn't just a garden anymore. It was a message, a statement that said, loud and clear, "You can't break me." By the time I was done, over 1,000 flowers bloomed across my front yard in a dazzling, defiant display. When the sun rose the next morning, the entire neighborhood stopped to stare. Karen's reaction was priceless. She marched down the street, her face turning an unnatural shade of red. I stood on my porch, arms crossed, as she sputtered in outrage. This is an abomination," she hissed. But when she tried to hand me another violation, I was ready. "Read the bylaws, Karen," I said sweetly, waving the highlighted section. "It's a memorial garden, and there's nothing you can do about it." For the first time, she was speechless, but I knew she wouldn't give up so easily. Sure enough, a week later, I received a summons to an emergency HOA meeting. The agenda, my excessive landscaping. I wasn't worried. I had a plan. As the meeting began, Karen wasted no time launching into a tirade about maintaining community standards and disruptive eyesores. But when it was my turn to speak, I didn't just defend myself. I exposed her. I revealed the records I had found, proof that Karen had a history of targeting homeowners, pushing them to the brink, then buying their properties at discounted prices. This wasn't just about flowers. It was about power and greed. The room fell silent. Neighbors who had once feared her began to murmur. I could see the cracks forming in her perfect image. And then, the final blow, I handed the HOA board a petition signed by dozens of residents calling for her removal. By the end of the night, Karen was stripped of her position, and just like that, her reign of terror was over. In the days that followed, something amazing happened. My garden inspired others to reclaim their yards. The sterile cookie-cutter lawns were replaced by bursts of wildflowers and lush greenery. The neighborhood came alive with color and community. And as for Karen, without her power, she became a ghost. I heard she eventually sold her house and moved away. As I stood in my garden one evening, the sun casting a warm glow over the blooms, I realized something profound. Flowers weren't just decoration. They were a symbol of resilience. No matter how much someone tried to tear you down, you could always choose to grow back stronger. And if anyone else dared to challenge that, well, I had 1,000 flowers ready to remind them exactly who they were dealing with. And Karen, I like to think that somewhere out there, she's still fuming. But the truth is, she never really stood a chance. Not against me. Not against 1,000 flowers. The next morning, I stood at my kitchen window, sipping coffee and staring at the empty patch of dirt where my flower bed used to be. The silence outside felt louder than any argument. Just yesterday, that spot had been a riot of colors. Roses, lavender, and my prized sunflowers swaying gently in the breeze. Now there was nothing but bare soil, a few broken stems poking out like reminders of the chaos Karen had left behind. My stomach twisted in anger, but beneath that, there was something else, determination. She thought she had won, but she had no idea who she was dealing with. If she wanted a war, I was more than ready. I grabbed my phone, scrolled through my contacts, and called my old friend Dylan. He wasn't just any gardener. He was an award-winning landscape designer, and more importantly, he owed me a favor. "How fast can you get here?" I asked, my voice tense. Within an hour, his truck pulled up in my driveway, loaded with plants, mulch, and a mischievous glint in his eye. As soon as I explained my plan, he let out a low whistle. "You sure about this?" he asked. "Karen's gonna lose her mind." "That's the idea," I said, a grin spreading across my face. We spent the entire afternoon transforming that bare patch of dirt into something extraordinary. Not just flowers. I wanted a spectacle. We planted over 1,000 blooms, everything from bold marigolds to delicate cherry blossoms. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, my front yard had become a floral wonderland. The air buzzed with the scent of jasmine and honeysuckle, and tiny solar lights twinkled among the petals like stars. This wasn't just about flowers anymore. This was about making a statement. And Karen? Oh, she noticed. The next morning I heard her before I saw her. The screech of her golf cart wheels stopped right outside my house. I peeked through the blinds as she stood frozen, mouth agape, surveying the sea of flowers blooming in defiance. She yanked out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen, probably reporting me to the HOA board. But this time, I was ready. I had spent hours combing through the HOA guidelines, highlighting every loophole. As it turned out, while large-scale flower beds were prohibited, the bylaws said nothing about personal garden art displays. and technically every flower had been labeled as part of an art installation. Even better, I had obtained official permits from the city, making my extravagant garden untouchable. By the time Karen knocked on my door, I was already holding the paperwork. "Problem?" I asked, my tone dripping with fake sweetness. Her face flushed red as she waved a copy of the HOA guidelines at me. "This is a violation. You can't." "Oh, but I can," I cut her off, holding up the permits with a smile. "You see these flowers? They're not landscaping. They're art, and the city agrees." For the first time, Karen was speechless. She opened and closed her mouth like a fish gasping for air. I could see the wheels turning in her head, but she had nothing, no rule, no clause that could stop me, and that's when I knew I'd won this round. But I wasn't about to let my guard down. Not with Karen. I knew her well enough to realize she wouldn't take this defeat lightly. No, this was just the beginning, and whatever she was planning next, I had to be ready. And as I stood on my porch, watching her storm back to her golf cart, I promised myself something. No matter how far she went, I would go further. And Karen, she had no idea what I had planned next. A week passed, and my garden became the talk of the entire neighborhood. People slowed down as they drove by. Some even stopped to take pictures. Kids giggled and chased each other around the flower beds. The local paper did a feature on my floral wonderland, calling it a symbol of creativity and defiance against HOA tyranny. Karen, however, was anything but amused. Every time I caught a glimpse of her, her jaw was clenched so tight I thought her teeth might shatter. At first, I thought I had won. I had outmaneuvered her, embarrassed her, and proved that she couldn't control everything. But deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before she struck back. Karen wasn't the type to let go of a grudge, especially one this public. And I was right. It started with the letter. One morning, I found an unmarked envelope stuffed into my mailbox. No stamp, no return address, just my name scribbled on the front in blocky, angry letters. My stomach tightened as I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typed message. "You think you've won. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Enjoy your flowers while you can. Soon they'll be gone." Along with everything else, my pulse hammered in my ears. The letter wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. Karen was planning something, and whatever it was, she wanted me to know. I couldn't stop her. I spent the rest of the day on edge, jumping at every sound outside my window. Had she hired someone to destroy my garden again? Was she planning to get the entire HOA board involved? My mind spun with possibilities, but by sunset, nothing had happened. Maybe she was bluffing. Maybe the letter was just a scare tactic. I couldn't have been more wrong. That night, just after midnight, a faint buzzing sound woke me. At first, I thought it was a distant lawnmower or some late-night delivery truck, but when I looked outside, my blood ran cold. Drones. 3 small drones hovered over my yard, their red lights blinking softly as they circled above my flowers. I grabbed my phone and started recording as one of the drones lowered towards the ground and released a fine, powdery substance over my flower beds. My heart pounded as I realized what it was. Weed killer. Karen wasn't just trying to destroy my garden, she wanted to poison it. I sprinted outside, yelling at the top of my lungs, hoping to scare the drones away. The moment I stepped onto my lawn, the drones shot upward and vanished into the night sky. I knelt down and touched the soil, my fingers coming away coated in the foul-smelling chemical. My flowers were still standing, but I knew it wouldn't be long before they withered. And Karen, she was watching. I felt it. I wasn't going to let her win. The next morning, I filed a formal complaint with the local police. I showed them the footage from my phone, every frame clear as day. The officer sighed, shaking his head. "Unless you can prove who's behind it, there's not much we can do," he said. I didn't need proof. I knew it was Karen, but if she thought she could bully me into submission, she had no idea who she was messing with. I doubled down. I called Dylan again, and by the end of the week, my yard wasn't just a garden anymore. It was a fortress. I installed motion sensor cameras disguised as birdhouses. I lined my flower beds with anti-drone nets, invisible from the street, but capable of trapping anything that flew too low. I even got a special permit to install a low electric fence nothing dangerous, just enough to give any trespasser a little shock. And the flowers? I replanted them, twice as many, but the real masterpiece came next. I commissioned a 20-foot floral sculpture, an enormous middle finger made entirely of bright red roses, facing directly toward Karen's house. It was petty, it was ridiculous, and it was perfect. When Karen saw it, she nearly drove her golf cart into a mailbox. For a while, things seemed to calm down. The drones stopped. The anonymous letters vanished. Even Karen herself seemed to back off, her glares becoming less venomous. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. And then the HOA board summoned me. A crisp official letter arrived on a Saturday morning, informing me that my excessive floral displays were a violation of community aesthetic standards. The kicker: Karen had recently been elected HOA president, a title she planned to wield like a weapon. At the hearing, Karen sat at the head of the table, a smug smile plastered across her face. As I presented my case, I had permits, video evidence, and the support of half the neighborhood. But Karen, she had the power, and that's when she made her move. "I'm afraid your garden is a public nuisance," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "And unless you agree to remove it all, we'll be forced to fine you $500 a day until it's gone." My vision blurred with rage. She wanted to bankrupt me, and legally she could. But as I stood there, facing down the woman who had turned my life into a battlefield, I made a decision. I wasn't just going to fight back, I was going to destroy her, and I already knew exactly how. I knew if I wanted to beat Karen, I couldn't play by her rules. I had to change the game. She had power through the HOA, but power like that always comes with secrets. And if there's one thing about secrets, they never stay hidden for long. I started digging. It wasn't easy. Karen had built a fortress of fear around herself. Most neighbors were too intimidated to speak out, and the HOA records were buried beneath a maze of bureaucratic red tape. But after weeks of late nights and coffee-fueled research, I found the crack in her armor: financial discrepancies. Turns out, Karen wasn't just a busybody with too much time on her hands. She was embezzling from the HOA funds, quietly skimming maintenance fees into her own private account, under the guise of community beautification projects. No one questioned it, because who would suspect the perfect HOA president? I had proof: bank transfers, fake invoices, even emails where she pressured board members into silence. But I didn't want to just expose her. I wanted to humiliate her, and I knew exactly how to do it. The HOA Summer Gala was the biggest event of the year, a pompous, over-the-top affair where Karen basked in the admiration of her carefully curated kingdom. It was also the perfect stage for her downfall. I partnered with Dylan and a few other neighbors Karen had wronged. We pooled our resources and pulled off a move so bold it would be talked about in the community for years. On the night of the gala, the clubhouse glittered with fairy lights and polished marble. Karen stood at the podium, delivering a speech about community values while wearing a nauseatingly pink power suit. She had no idea what was coming. When the lights dimmed for the community tribute slideshow, that's when we struck. The first images were harmless: smiling kids, neighborhood cookouts. But then it changed. The next slide flashed up: a bank statement with Karen's name and a suspicious $12,000 transfer. The room murmured in confusion. Another slide: forged invoices marked HOA landscaping. Then an email from Karen threatening a board member who questioned the missing funds. The murmurs turned to gasps. Karen's face turned a deep, furious red. "Shut it off," she shrieked, scrambling toward the projector. But before she could reach it, I stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice echoing through the stunned room, "our beloved HOA president has been busy, just not with gardening." Laughter rippled through the crowd, sharp, bitter laughter. People hated Karen's reign of terror, and now they finally had a reason to push back. I laid out the evidence, calmly, clearly, and with surgical precision. The entire HOA board turned against her on the spot. By the end of the night, Karen wasn't just stripped of her presidency, she was under official investigation for embezzlement. And me, I wasn't finished. The next morning, I transformed my garden into the ultimate act of defiance. an enormous sign made of sunflowers spelling out, "Karen who?" Neighbors cheered as they drove by. Even the mailman stopped to take a picture. For the first time in years, the community felt free. Karen? She barricaded herself in her house, blinds drawn, and refused to be seen in public. But the best part, the HOA board unanimously voted to make me the new president. And the first thing I did, I passed a new rule. Flowers are always welcome. But here's the thing about people like Karen. They don't just disappear. A month later, I found another anonymous letter in my mailbox. No threats this time, just 6 chilling words. "I'm not done with you yet." And I knew this war was far from over.